So in this video we're going to look at removing and replacing or reinstalling after servicing your bicycle's bottom bracket. We're going to be talking about the Shimano HollowTech system. So here's the visible bottom bracket with the crankset removed. Now the way the Shimano HollowTech system works is it is an outboard bearing. So the black plastic that you can see there, that is the bearing. And the silver bit is the aluminium casing which screws into the bottom bracket shell of the bicycle frame itself. So your crank spindle goes through, and when you put weight on it, it rests on the black bit, and the bearing takes the weight obviously, and this the whole black bearing turns. Now in theory you can't service the bearings themselves. This is really designed as a throwaway unit, and you're supposed to buy a new one when and if the bearings go. In this case I'm just going to remove this to check the condition inside the bottom bracket shell and redo the anti-seize on the threads just to check everything's okay, that there's no corrosion, etc. But this is the same procedure that you would follow if you were replacing it with a new one. So each side of the bottom bracket, each case unscrews, and they're handed. They go in different directions on either side, so you need to look at it. It will be marked on there with a Tighten arrow, so to undo it you do it in the direction opposite Tighten obviously, and you need the special tool. This is not a genuine Shimano tool, this is a cheap thing off eBay which cost about 10 bucks and it works just fine. So you carefully put it on, and once it's mounted in the correct notches you apply pressure in the correct direction, and once it's sufficiently loose you can just take the wrench away and just undo the rest of it by hand. Next, turn the bike around so you can do the other side, and probably get the chain out of the way if it's resting on the bottom bracket shell. And then of course we're going to undo this one in the opposite direction to the left hand side. By the way, this wrench I'm using, this is a steel thing, and the bottom bracket casing is aluminium. So if you're not careful and you let it slip like I just did, you can end up damaging it. And you'll have ugly looking marks on the alloy casing, so be careful. And so there you see, when you remove this side, there is the plastic tube which is attached to the right hand side. That tube doesn't really do anything particularly functional, it's just there to seal against water. So at this point it's a good idea to look inside the bottom bracket shell. Just check the aluminium or the carbon fiber for any problems, aluminium corrosion. If there's any water there, it's not uncommon to see that, so don't worry too much about it. Dry it out if it is. And just as an aside, this screw which is projecting through, this is the screw which holds the guide for the cables. Sometimes that screw projects through too much up into the inside of the bottom bracket shell, and in that case it can interfere with the little plastic tube that we were just looking at. So in this case it's fine, but in your case just check it, just make sure that it's filed down sufficiently far. Alright, so to clean out the old grease or anti-seize or dirt, whatever's in there, I'm just going to use some degreaser on a rag. Spray it directly on the rag. I wouldn't spray it on try to spray it directly on the bike, try to keep it off paint and the plastics. And just give everything a good clean. And I'm just putting my old bottom bracket straight back in, so you can ignore this step if you're putting a new one in. But in my case I'm going to give the old one a good clean, except I'm not going to use degreaser on this because I don't want it anywhere near the plastic or particularly the rubber seals. And give the threads on the bottom bracket casings a good clean. A nylon brush like the one pictured is handy for this sort of thing. So this is how the three components fit together. They just the plastic tube just fits, push fits into the into each side of the bottom bracket. All these components are marked, by the way, with L's and R's for left and right, so you can't get the orientation mixed up. And that plastic tube, as I mentioned earlier, is just there as a shield to prevent water which enters the inside of the bike frame from getting into the bottom bracket bearings from the inside, as it were, instead of the outside. The nice thing about the HollowTech system is that the bearings are outboard of the bottom bracket shell. That has two advantages. One, there's less leverage from the pedals on the bottom bracket simply because they're closer to the pedals. And secondly, because they're outside the shell, they can be of a larger diameter, which again means they will wear less quickly and provide more stiffness and other good things. Now we can think about putting the bottom bracket back in the bike. It's critical to use some anti-seize or some grease. I prefer anti-seize because we're not really trying to lube anything. This is a nickel-based anti-seize. The standard stuff that people use is usually copper, so that's fine. Just apply it with your fingers directly to the male threads of the bottom bracket casing, and also the inner threads of the bottom bracket shell. Just incidentally, while we've got all this apart and while everything's clean, if the reason that you're replacing the bottom bracket is because the bearings have worn, and you think that they've worn perhaps a bit too quickly than they should have a look at this surface here, this exterior plane surface. It needs to be exactly vertical and very smooth and well machined back. Sometimes, for example, you get paint from the bodywork on the bike which has come across the edge and is causing it to be uneven. Sometimes it's just machined poorly. If it doesn't look correct, then that means that when you screw the bottom bracket side on, it can end up not being perfectly aligned with the other side, and therefore with the crankset, which means that the bearings will wear prematurely. In any case, on this bike it's fine, and I'm applying anti-seize to that surface as well as the threads because it's going to assist a little bit with waterproofing. Turn the bike around and repeat all of that with the other side. Apply the anti-seize. And then you can reinsert your old or new bottom bracket. So you start with the right hand side. That's the one that you should have put the plastic tube in, or if it's new it will have come assembled like that. Carefully do it up. As you thread it, be very careful to check that the threads have taken. It should be very smooth if you've got nice clean threads and there's anti-seize applied. You won't need much force to turn it, so be very careful not to cross the threads because all of this is aluminium. It's soft, and crossed threads are going to very quickly be damaged threads. Then do it up as hard as you can by hand, and once you've done that, then it's time to use the wrench. Don't try to over tighten this thing. You'll notice that the wrench doesn't have a particularly long handle on it, so that's an indication of how much torque it requires. Really, one good pull is all it requires. Once you're done, get a rag and clean off any excess anti-seize. They'll probably have been a little bit squeezed out the edges of the threads. Then turn the bike around and do the left-hand bottom bracket casing. So as you screw this one in, it will mate itself with the plastic tubing, although you're unlikely to feel that. It'll just happen automatically inside. You'll notice, by the way, how much easier it is for me to thread these serviced threads in place as opposed to how difficult it was to undo them before. So that's a testimony to how dirty they were before and how much of an improvement it is now. Okay, you just need to tighten that one with the wrench, exactly the same as on the other side, except in the opposite direction, of course. And then you're done, ready to put the crankset in place, which is the topic of another video of mine. Okay, hope that helped people. Good luck and have fun.